Nigel, you know that Beefheart and Zappa are the same astrological sign.
I guess they're pretty close, yeah.
They're both Capricorns.
Well, I always thought Frank was a Sagittarius.
Well, he's December 21st, which I guess is on the cusp. And Beefheart's January 15th, right?
Right.
So I think
they're close enough.
they're within the same zone. Right? So do they disprove astrology because they're so different?
Boy, that's a question for where's what you call it, Nostradamus when you need him or somebody. Well, they're not really. I always thought of them, astrology or anything else, as being like total opposites but complementary. I mean, they both were kind of outsiders and wackos and weirdos, but Don was the naturistical kind of guy who was more interested in the organic, and Frank was interested in the technological and the machine,
So they're opposites.
So they were, but they had so much in common though.
Okay, what can you say was in common?
Well, the outsider thing. Both of them were outsiders. Frank had a much more savvy way of dealing with being an outsider. Whereas Don was real feral. He just sort of did it from almost a, well, fuck them if they don't like me, then I just go off and live in the woods and have my life that way. And Frank learned how to work with it to make it work to his advantage, and that was where they differed. But I think at the root of it, their impulses were remarkably similar. They both just were.
They both were sculptors.
They were both kind of, in a way, physical artists.
Yeah.
That was, I think, the thing they had in common was, Frank was I don't know if Gerry or you, Bob, if you ever saw any of Frank's drawings.
No.
He could really draw. I mean, he would.
That was his first art.
He would have been a really great draftsman, or it would have been a very kind of a geometrical form. I mean, he never would have been an impressionist or anything. It would have been a very, very precise kind of drawing, but he could draw. And I think that was where he and Don maybe had, early on something in common too, was the graphic side of things.
Yeah, because that's what I say about Frank on my album, is that he manipulated kinetic space and acoustic space with a visual bias, visual being his drawing thing.
Sure.
So that was his root.
Yeah, that was why he always wanted to keep getting into film, I think.
Yeah.
It was he really needed expression for that visual sense that he had, and he did have it. I think you asked me earlier when the machine wasn't running here, what it was like to walk around New York and look at those comments.
Do it. Give us some of that.
They were graphic. He would talk about buildings.
The shape of the building?
The shape of the buildings, he'd say. Remember, we were walking down Broadway, and there was some crappy building that was about to be demolished. He said, that's just going to be another cheap Chicago demo. He's like, he'd always refer back to things, from his own vocabulary. He had his own language, practically, and he had to understand what the in-jokes were.
You mean Chicago band?
No, Chicago being, because the tour had been in Chicago just before I joined it up. It was like the previous leg of the tour, and they had been in, I guess the hotel they were staying in was a real flea bag. It wasn't a flea bag, but it was just a really crappy hotel. And I guess the common joke was this place should be demoed, so it was a cheap Chicago demo. That was the way Frank kind of operated.
Well, you knew what he meant.
I knew what he meant, but it was just funny to see it because, in that context, it was very appropriate. This place was the building he was referring to did deserve to be, dynamited or something. And, that isn't a particularly, hilarious version of, example of the way he talked, but he always put everything into his own zone of reference to the point where you felt like you were walking around with somebody from Mars. And it was, I said, I think in the book at some point, no wonder I never needed drugs, or Frank never needed drugs for that matter, because he was so good at shaping reality to his own ends that, drugs would have been really beside the point.
Right, so when he says that New York changed him when he moved there in '67. Did he ever talk about that?
No, he never did, but I got a sense that New York was a place he had a great love-hate relationship with, because he had a lot of friends there, a lot of old lovers, a lot of girlfriends from New York, been, involved with a lot of women there over the years, and, obviously he'd sort of reached a point of his success while in New York. The whole Garrick Theater moved him ahead, as far as his career went, it was just, miles ahead, because he got written up in New York publications, and that's what you need, But he didn't like it as a place. I don't
Even though he didn't like L.A., so where would he ideally want to live?
Well, I think he got the closest to his ideal environment when he was up there locked in the basement.
Yeah.
The outside world was what he wanted to stay away from.
He never said some place that he'd like to be in the world. You remember this? Remember just before he died, he talked about going to Australia? Did you ever hear that?
No, I never heard that.
Yeah, Gerry, remember that?
Sure.
Yeah.
What did he say?
He wanted to start a Bauhaus in Australia about 1990.
Bauhaus.
What a wag.
That must be cancer. The cancer was moving to his brain.
Oh, man.
Yeah, Bauhaus in the 20s.
Yeah, that's poor Frank.
Yeah, so that doesn't sound real to you.
Well, no, I mean, I think he might have been making some kind of a joke. Frank had a real nobility with humor. I mean, the more he was sort of hurting or suffering, the better his sense of humor came out. In fact, he once said to me in an airport situation, everything was going wrong that day, and it was, you know, like I was running a temperature, I was coming down with the flu, they misplaced my guitar in the baggage handling, and, you know, it was just like a real grim situation. And I was sitting there cracking jokes because I thought the whole thing was totally absurd. You know, I just have a tendency to do that. And he kind of looked at me and says, "Don't ever lose your sense of humor," you know,
Yeah.
which, you know, that was his philosophy. I mean, the worse things got for him, the more jokes he would crack. And I wouldn't be at all surprised if maybe the Australian thing wasn't his idea of some kind of elaborate joke.
Right. Now, going over to Dave Wally, I think Dave told me that when you read his intro, whatever he added to the book, you said that was the best thing written about Frank.
Yeah.
What do you talk about Wally's view of Frank and what you learned from it or what you disagreed about it?
Well, it was really fascinating. You know, I didn't know David Wally. I met him like for 20 minutes maybe.
When was that?
In '71.
Oh yeah, right.
And that was it. We didn't communicate at all.
Yeah.
So when I did get into, he got in touch with me via the internet after reading Being Frank. I think he read Being Frank. Anyway, that was getting a hold of me. So, and you know, I had read his book, but I didn't really think about it when we were doing it, except what was the fuss about, you know, when it was published. But I was subsequently starting to correspond with David and become friendly with him. We're actually friends at this point, and not only that, but I should probably preface this with the statement that we're working on a book together.
Yeah, I saw on the internet, July 28th, did that happen?
Yeah.
What was that?
We're about 2/3 of the way done with it. We're still finishing it up. It's a series of email letters called The Lost Episodes,
right?
Which is about Frank, it's about the internet, it's about communication, it's about a lot of things we've been talking about tonight, strangely enough.
Well, that's why you have to, if you do the book, stick my little manifesto in the middle of it, you know, just in between. But the
1,000-page manifesto.
No,
Right.
it's only
It's
Xerox. I'd say it's like may take up 8 pages of a book. Anyways, because it's about the history of communication.
Well,
anyways,
yeah, but
so
that's what it is.
But what did happen on July 28th? You were on the radio?
Oh yeah, I was
was
on
that?
a Radio Net show. Which
With
is,
David?
No, I just was talking about the lost episodes because that's the whole subject of. I didn't talk about it that much on the show, but the lost episodes because it's about the internet and how communications work and the cyber era and so on.
And you get calls?
Yes, some. One guy, this was a funny one. One guy claimed he knew Frank's dad. In fact, knew them in Ontario. It's kind of a funny story. But it was apropos of nothing on this.
Yeah.
But getting back to David's view though of Frank is, I've really come to respect him a great deal because he has a whole tremendous insight into Frank. I mean, he was hurt so badly by that whole situation with the commercial potential. It was devastating. And to this day, 20-odd years later, he still is very, very affected by it.
Yeah.
And, I've realized right away, it was kind of maybe a bit egotistical on my part, but as I grew to understand a little better, I thought, maybe I can help him. Maybe I can help him talk through this stuff, because as somebody who knew Frank, maybe I can kind of help him get to the root of what it is about Frank that hurt him, and maybe he can get beyond it. And,
have you figured it out?
Yeah, oh sure.
Have you helped him? Does he know that?
We'd have to ask him. Does he feel better? He seems to.
What do you think it is, if you can say?
The pain of this person who he respected so much, behaving in that way. Which I understood too, because I had a similar thing with Frank myself.
In light of the fact that Frank begged him in a way to continue the book, because David was not going to do the book.
Right, exactly. See, it was doubly horrible when the fallout came, and Frank was just so awful to him about it. And I think David is a very credulous and trusting kind of a person. He's not a cynic. He's not he doesn't have that layer of defense. And if Frank, as I well know, when Frank wanted to be devastating, he could just lay you flat. He was the most sort of sarcastic, person.
Laser beam. Yeah.
And he just turned David into scorched earth in an emotional sense. So I think what David needed to do is sort of pull back and, in some sense, divorce himself from the whole situation emotionally and just look at it, objectively, look at the different pieces and see how it got to that point and understand, why Frank may have done that. Not to justify it, but
now
just
he did
understand
that, from '73 on, but he never had anybody to talk about it. So
Right.
you were redoing the withdrawal thing with him?
Right, that was what we sort of did. We took,
and
walked through it. And, you know, what happened was in the process, like we wrote about it in
Yeah.
in the first part of the last episodes, you know, and ultimately David was able to kind of step away from it. I think he's kind of gone on. He's got another book he's working on now, a really interesting one about music and politics.
Yeah, yeah, he's doing history of the last 50 years or whatever.
Right. And that, you know, that is, it's, you know, obviously a Frank-like subject, but it isn't at all that obsessive thing anymore, you know. So he may be a recovering Zappaholic.
Yeah, but it's you're the person to do it since you
Well,
both got burned.
I don't want to take credit for that, but yeah, maybe being able to talk about it might have helped him.
Yeah. Okay, back to some ideas. We saw P. Fialka or Afnra, one of these two documentaries on Frank that aren't out yet, right, Gerry?
Right.
And Frank talked about, he sees his work, sees all these melodies, and the melody becomes a word. And then maybe it's the same idea or another way to go at approaching the word. He says you got a melody, and you got a sine wave, and you turn it in perpendicular itself, and then you have a climate. Now, did he talk about those ideas in 71, 72?
Yeah, sure.
What
He
can you
didn't talk
remember?
about them that sounds very specific.
Yeah.
Besides, he talked about those things generally, though.
Why
He
do you-
used the word climate a lot in rehearsal situations and in concerts.
Satellite conductor, weather control.
Yeah, weather.
kind of
Yeah,
thing.
weather was. In fact, the first song I ever wrote, well, the second song I ever wrote about Frank was one called "Weird Weather," and it was about his ability to take any kind of a situation and create what almost was like a meteorological imbalance.
Which his father was, a
His father
meteorologist.
was a meteorologist,
Yeah.
strangely enough. But yeah, Frank was very aware on some supranormal level. I mean, we're getting into mysticism here with Frank, which you often do for some reason. I mean, it just couldn't help it because he was an alchemist at heart, let's face it. And what I noticed
But
about,
that means he wasn't scientific.
well, he was
Just remote.
No,
pre-science.
he was a quantifier, like
Yeah,
you mentioned,
yeah.
he also was a quantifier.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
alchemy is not science.
That's right,
No,
but he
it's-
seemed
it's,
to have...
It's early, it's pre-science, you know. But anyway, the point of it is yeah, there was always a tendency with Frank for what, you know, you just get into these musical environments, and I felt them as weather. I don't know how to describe what you were just describing, pretty close to what it felt like being up on that stage and playing that stuff.
And he talked about climate a lot.
Yeah, he talked about climate. That was a real important thing to him, was getting the right climate when he did a performance, absolutely.
So rehearsals, that word would get
Rehearsals,
used a
and
lot.
he would talk about it acoustically, acoustic climate.
Yeah.
You know, whether this is like a cool environment, a warm environment, or anything in between. Yeah.
See, and that was the metaphor in McLuhan, the
Yeah.
hot and cool.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's the
medium
one.
cool, that movie, right?
Yeah, it was
Yeah.
the weather was a metaphor for
Hmm.
what Marshall was talking about.
It's interesting.
That's why he called the computer a global thermostat, you know, the
Mhm.
way to control the weather. So Frank was working instinctively
Yeah,
on his level
yeah, I
with
think
that.
so.
I don't think there was any other musicians who, or even in serious music, who talked in terms of climate, right?
I don't think so.
No.
It was Frank definitely was possessed of synesthesia. I mean, he saw everything as a graphic image, an audio image, and the audio image was very precise. It was, you know, measured right down to, you know, how many vibrations per second a particular, you know, tone or timbre had. You know, the whole thing with climate and temperature.
Right,
Just
you
a
know.
certain kind of a comfort level or lack thereof, you know, because
Right.
he often thought about how uncomfortable can I make this audience? And he wanted to be able to measure the comfort zone, you know, just to see how far they were towards screaming agony or, you know,
Yeah.
how much it was pleasurable, you know. It was a strange thing.
So you mentioned his synesthesia. I sort of, when I took drugs, I get into a synesthetic state. I don't know, you get this warm fur ball around you or something, and you feel all your senses were working together in a new level. I always felt he either looked, when I was with him or looked at him, I felt that he had that fur ball around him, that aura. So he was in a naturally drugged state. You know, maybe it was just a projection, but I sort of thought that he had
He
that.
was definitely not on the level of reality that most people are.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, whether that was achieved
Coffee and cigarettes?
coffee and cigarettes or, you know, just a high mental metabolism, which he definitely, the thing I noticed about Frank that always fascinated me was the discrepancy in his mental metabolism and his physical metabolism. You know, his mind was always racing at 1 billion miles an hour. Physically, he was kind of slow and sluggish and klutzy and clumsy and, you know, all of that. And it was I think, in a way, that dichotomy created a lot of his work because,
Created a lot of his work.
yeah, because I think his output, his creative output, came from feeling that discrepancy keenly and maybe trying to align the two discrepancies.
So what After climate, what comes next, Gerry?
Let's see, I'm sorry. G-Dust, Training Film, or Time.
Right. Okay, time. Did he talk to you
What
about
time is
time?
it?
Yeah. Did he ever talk to you about time? See, there's an excerpt from some interview just before he died. I think he said that he disagreed with Einstein, that space and time weren't interpenetrating, and he said that what you have as space is a sphere, is a Mobius strip, whereas time is a sphere. The time that's happening all times at once is a sphere around the Mobius strip. So he sort of separated space and time,
Right, yeah.
rather than interchangeable. So you ever hear him talk about that?
Let me just switch tape.
Or any of those concepts? Oh,